Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. It is Wednesday. Man, that's loud. It is Wednesday, March 23rd, 2 days from the consecration, and we're pumped up. Why? Because today we are talking about mystics and messiahs. I'm your host, Jeremiah Bannister, the one and only, the OG, the paleocrat, your boy, the Kaiser. Every single Monday, Reason and Theology. Wednesday and Friday, Meaning of Catholic. And there's going to be a whole bunch more. So you're going to want to make sure to go over to PaleocratDiaries.com. Stat, link is in the description below, as well as a big-time warning. A big-time warning. But before you even venture out, before you even go, we have to do what we always do. With coffee in hand, straw in hand, straight to the dome, we resolve deep inside to take a knee for Christ the King, to resolve every thought, word, and deed to the Lord, the restoration of all things. And we begin this every day. Why? Because we're alive. It's another day that the Lord has made. We're going to rejoice. We're going to be glad in it. We're grateful with a joyful heart that we have the opportunity to face these extremely difficult challenges. And it's why we never give up. We keep on smiling. And memento mori. We remember we're going to die. All of us are going to die. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. So we resolve deep inside, dream bigger thoughts, right? Figure out what you love. What are you called to do? Pray hard. Howl to the sun, the S-O-N. Howl to the sun, crying out that he guides you, that he leads your feet in this world, that you do not rely on your own understanding, but instead that you view all things through the lens of that worldview that's been provided to us as creatures, right? As those made in the likeness and image of God, living and moving and having our being in his world. And we're doing that here with a passion, with a gusto, Super, super, super pumped. Actually, I don't even know if I have the window capture lined up. I do not. Let me go ahead and pop this up real quick. We're not going to spend too much time because we have a live chat after the show. And in fact, if you could, please, just real quickly, look down there in the description, and you are going to see a warning, okay? We're going to be talking about cults, okay? We've been talking about enthusiasms. We're going to be talking about cults, and we're going to be using this book, Mystics and Messiahs, Cults and New Religions in American History. We're going to be using this as our guide by Philip Jenkins. Fantastic book. Now, of course, I have some disagreements. That happens in every case. Even with Knox and enthusiasm, there were disagreements. We lay those things out, right? They're smart guys, very informative. Same thing with even Father Lassance. I had some disagreements with certain things with Father Lassance. We talked about it. People are allowed to have all differences of opinion. And that way we come together and we pool our thoughts and we bring our resources together. And one of the ways we do that is by the comment section here, okay? So the comment section, people will post comments and everything else throughout the duration of the show. But see, here's the thing. Because we're talking about cults, there's going to be certain topics that are a little bit, let's just say, risque. Okay, let's say risque, right? For mature audiences. And so we need to let people know this is a family channel. And because of that, I've tried to actually do a lot better. When I first started, there were details that I would say that I might be a little bit desensitized to because of my experiences in my life, good and bad, has led me to this place where I'm a little bit desensitized. And Mr. Flanders, the grand poobah over here, had to say, yo, homie, you got to ease up, man. You got to ease up on that a little. And he was right. And so I've tried to do a really good job of that. But see, here's the thing. It's inevitable when you're talking about the occult. I mean, it's just inevitable. So what we're going to do is we are going to reserve the more adult-oriented questions. Now, there will be some details, right? Inevitable, because they're part of that equation, that we will talk about. I will limit the best I can to the details, but the live chat, and this is a warning for the live chat as well, the live chat is going to have many more details. Many more details, things that, in fact, things I did not know, things that I have learned. in the process of this, right? And this is a learning thing for me. And so I try to read these books about 3 times before I talk about it. So I have notes and highlights. In fact, this one, let me just show you real quick. Let me just show you. Okay, so this is how dumb it gets. This is really, I mean, it gets bad. Believe me, it's like, it gets really stupid. There's let me see if I can find the page that's just like crazy bad. Where did I put? Oh, right. Well, yeah. Let's see. Look at this. I have notes all around it. So I have completely filled the margin, except for the top, right? And there are other ones. There are other ones like that. You'll see. And so throughout the show, I've learned a lot. And I put a lot of work into this. And so, but there are certain topics that we just have to hold out on. We are not, however, going to hold out on this. Sam Ashlock, good to see you, buddy. And all those wolves, man, I hope that you guys have liked, commented, shared, and subscribed, not only to the show, not only to this episode, but to the channel. There's a bunch of really, really, really great content over here. Sometimes the comment gets a little bit curious, but we don't agree with each other on everything, but that's one of those things. Okay, Sam says, not on topic, but could you give an example of a presuppositional argument against Protestantism for those of us who are slow to the uptake? Yes, there's a kind of presuppositional argument, in fact, used the entire book of known as Catholic Controversy, Defense of the Faith by Francis de Sales. He boils everything down to a most ruling assumption, and that being authority. So whether he's talking about the mission, right, a person who feels called to the ministry, interpretation of text, and what do you do when there are divisions, or, what is a church for that matter? What is the canon? What is obligatory, dogmatically obligatory on the believers, not just in your congregation, but across the world? And how do you do anything like excommunication? How would you do anything like that where it would be binding in any way that wherever that individual goes, they're like Cain a little bit, where you can't just go across the street and say, well, it's kicked out of the Church of God over there for playing face cards. And people are like, oh, we have face cards every Wednesday. That kind of a thing, right? Or where you're going and you're teaching heresy, but then you're accepted in another group. And so what you do is you take their position, right? It's a twofold thing. One of those is that you do not answer the fool according to their folly. You don't embrace their beliefs and play monocle man with them and say, well, let's analyze text and I'll try to present the best case. You can do that. But at the end of the day, you can come up with an interpretation, but it must be within the bosom of the church. And we only know these things and they're settled. Those disagreements are only settled insofar as they could be settled by an authority that has competency, authority, and jurisdiction in order to do it. Same thing with, as I said, same thing with mission, holy orders, everything. He goes through and he tries to find some general ideas. Okay, so he says, for example, holy orders, right? And the idea of people being pastors, or the idea of different interpretations or churches or anything like that. And he boils them all back down to that single point. And so, yes, if Catholics use that argument regularly, that kind of argument, not answering them according to their folly. You don't embrace the monocle man autonomy position. And at the same time, you answer them according to their folly. You show them that if you believe those things to be true, you are left to moral and theological and ecclesiastical anarchy. It'd be relativism. And so, yes, that would be a good example of that. Okay. So, let's see here. Kevin says, good morning, Wolfpack, taking a knee for Christ. Every day for Christ the King. Kaiser time is the only time. You better believe it, homie. You better believe. There is no such thing, by the way, as late or on time. That's not even real. Partial shaven mustachio edition. Yeah, man. Yeah, I used the electric razor this morning. Use the electric razor. Sean says, straw of Kool-Aid straight to the dome. That's good, man. That's good, man. Yeah, it doesn't matter. You drinking coffee, you drinking Kool-Aid, drinking, I guess, water, I guess. But yeah, you're like, yeah, go ahead and do that all day long. Nick Monk says, you know what is a nutty cult? The Cardinal Siri was the real Pope group. Totally 100%. Totally 100%, man. Yeah, they have a very detailed conspiracy theory and a lot of hatred, us versus them stuff. Totally, big time. Yeah, and I mean, and now they're left with the Pope of Desire. In other words, no Pope. There is no such thing as that. We are not Nestorians on that score, you know? It's like, I have a Pope of desire. No, you have a real one. You have a real one. And to them, the Roman See would be toast anyway, so Christ's promises are just gone. Let's see. Lee says, people are being abused right in our cities. Children need to be taught these things because it just keeps getting worse and worse, and we avoid reality. Yes, absolutely, Lee. Jennifer, I agree with you. I agree with you all the way. I'm even asking the sheriff to find a way to educate the public about remote mind control weapons because children are being mentally kidnapped and human trafficked. That'd be something, if you want to share more information about that, I'm willing to hear it. I don't know if anyone's familiar. There was a thing that was shared. And was it on Twitter? What was it? I'm trying to remember who it was. High profile and deep stater type group putting out FOIA information. And within that were things to do with microwave radiation and signals going to like affect your body and everything. Like, oh, that was something else. So don't look at that. It was kind of a little bit interesting, right? Kind of a little bit interesting. Yeah. So make sure to send that over to us. That'd be definitely, but I'm not entirely sure about the weapons that are being kidnapped other than, and human trafficked. I'm not entirely sure. Unfamiliar with that theory. Let's put it that way. You can send that, of course, PaleocratDiaries@gmail.com, or do even better, go and find us over on Telegram. So, all right, we are going to go. I've been playing this throughout the week. I'll play it today. I'll play it tomorrow, Wednesday. Today or tomorrow or Wednesday. Friday again. I'll play it again. And basically the idea is this. If you love the show, if you're one of those freaks and geeks who loves this program and you would like to have your picture or video included in a sequence, a little montage that goes along with the alert system, not the Wolfpack song that we're about to play. Okay, that's how it all started. But we're going to take that video, incorporate a couple videos that have been sent already to us, as well as any other video or picture. And I got to get on the Alpha Pack, the Wolfpack chats admins. I got to get on them because they're part of it. They've got to do it. They've got to do it, especially if they're here. Hallelujah, you got to do it. And so we definitely need to have that. But if you would like to have your video or your picture included in that as we make that transition every week over to the Octagon of History to talk about our topic of the day, make sure to do that. Let's see if we can. Let me see if I can do this without switching it over, because. Well, no, I think it's already set. I think it's already set. Let's see here. How would I do this? So I guess I can go to scene 2. There we go. Okay. Yeah. I'm over at scene 2. As you can see, members of the Wolfpack have already sent us videos. Oh, there's little Louie. That's my son, by the way. Totally rocking out. So make sure you got that coffee, Kool-Aid, water, whatever. Let's go. You gotta be pumped. There's no more fear. There's no more fear. There's no embarrassment. There's no shame. You're loving the Lord. You're children of the King. It's another day the Lord has made. Rejoice. Look at this clap. Wham! 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 I love it. Come on now. Wolfpack. Yeah. Look at his face. He's going to be super psyched, by the way. He's going to be like ridiculously pumped up because, we can switch over right now. Oh, he's going to be super pumped up because he has a dinosaur coming, dinosaur toy. He's like super hardcore into big dinosaur Rex. He loves big dinosaur Rex. Well, we got him a big dinosaur Rex. And that bugger's coming. All right. So here we go. This is the song, though, coming up right now. This is the song that we're going to be adding that video to. Okay? And because this is, of course, the alert system. The PaleocratDiaries alert system. Every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we blast that out. And why? That way it notifies all the freaks and the geeks around the world taking a knee for Christ the King every day. It notifies them that PaleocratDiaries is on the air. It gets them pumped. They get out their shofar. They're running through the apartment. They're dashing through the house. They're running in the fields, digging up the hole, or taking the wood off of the ground to find that little treasure chest where they can pull out the didgeridoo. The didgeridoo and the xylophone, the hammered dulcimer. Somebody's got to have a French horn. And of course, Haley, in the comments, she's releasing the carrier pigeons all the way around to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west. And why? Because we are entering the octagon of history. We're going to be talking about how in the world did we get here? What is this? What is this nonsense that we're surrounded by? All these occultic practices. It came from somewhere, and we are looking, of course, through the lens of history. We're going to be talking mystics and messiahs. It is the cults and new religions in American history by Philip Jenkins. This is episode 1. And we're going to be talking about all sorts of groups, real weirdos, real quackadoodles, right? Total loonbirds, crazy individuals with weird beliefs, I'll tell you. But those beliefs causing a havoc at the time, all sorts of tumult. At the same time, eventually more integrated, and integrated so much that some of it has found its way not only into the visible church where people are going to mass and they're praying and doing different things, but even in traditionalism. And we're going to be talking about that, and I know it's going to ruffle some feathers. Oh, believe you me. I'm unafraid of that, by the way. If you haven't got the clue, I am unafraid of ruffling those feathers. Because we have to start in the house of God. We got to, don't we? We got to. And if people stiffen their neck, you got to keep whacking. Wham, wham. You want to take a bunch of occultic ideas and drop them into this system? No, 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 no. No, 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 no. We are not going to be tolerating that. Yeah, and of course, Kevin is pumping the snare drum over in North Georgia. All right, by the way, Andrea says, hello, Paleocrat friends. Hi, Haley. Hope everyone is okay. Haley, of course, is doing okay. In fact, she is having a baby, hopefully, this week. Super pumped about that. Again, remember, right after the show, we are going to be talking deeper about these topics, and you will be able to engage in conversation. We will have question and answers. You do not need to participate in that. You can just go and watch. You don't even have to be on video. You don't have to say anything. You can be a lurker. Nobody is going to care. That's perfectly fine. But it's always great because different stories, different experiences, different ideas and understandings, different studies. I mean, some people study things from different perspectives, and they may come to a more, a fuller view, right? A more robust understanding of what we're talking about and providing resources to other people. And so it's a really, really important thing. And by the way, I'm not going to say, people say, really, you're saying that the occult has found its way into the traditional movement? Yeah, for sure. In part because there seems to be, for many people, there seems to be this kind of lack of awareness over how certain practices or certain understandings have infiltrated even their system. And that some of the views that they may maintain, while having a base that's like, okay, well, there are features of this that are in fact quite traditional, particularly things to do with demonology, for example. And I'll say this, for example, I watched a video, and I'm really hesitant to say what video it is. I watched a video, and an individual was talking about an exorcism. And this exorcism, allegedly, you had a demon who was saying, that he's here to possess a race, in fact, to possess the youth of America. And I wondered where this came from. And a book was cited. So I went and I looked up the book. And I said, well, who wrote that? Well, come to find out, a dude, I think his name is Apostle Greg Greenwald. Apostle. He's an apostle. And by the way, he's occultic. He is a New Thought metaphysician. Metaphysician. A New Thought, he's metaphysician. He's metaphysician. Metaphysician. This guy is into New Thought metaphysics. This guy is into thinking and speaking the faith capsules to create the universe and the reality around you. He decrees things. He's binding and loosing iniquities in people's hip joints. I'm dead serious. You can go and you can watch and you can see, what does this guy believe? And this is what I learned. And yes, demons lie. Demons lie. The idea that, well, a demon said this, whoop-dee-doo. Whoop-dee-doo. But here's the thing. I'm glad I found this out. I'm glad I went down this rabbit trail. And maybe this guy that said it, otherwise, a great guy, maybe he did not know. Okay, maybe he was unfamiliar with this, and who he was citing on this, and whether or not that guy's even believable. But I'm glad I went down that rabbit hole, not only because it was hilarious to see these weirdos, putting their magic hands toward the screen. I'm binding and loosing, and he's got this lady with, Tammy Faye Baker goopy makeup everywhere. And she's like, yes, I feel it. She's talking about people having their toes are kind of curled, but and now they're straightening out right now. Name of Jesus, amen. Pleading the blood, binding and loosing, blah, 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 blah. And they're doing that. Well, I looked this cat up to find out, and there's a AmericanLoons.blogspot.com or something like that. Has this dude, he's a loon bird. And come to find out, homeboy was, I believe, either responsible for the book or responsible for peddling the book that ultimately led to my parents requiring me to get rid of all my He-Man toys as a kid. I'm like, no! All this time, I did not know who it was. Come to find out, Apostle Greg Greenwald. What a weirdo. What a weirdo. Ugh. But that, and the Smurfs are dead, and it's supposed to soften kids about being gay. Can't watch Smurfs. G.I. Joe. Can't watch G.I. Joe. Yeah, none of that stuff. This dude was into that. All these parents believing it, gobbling it up left and right. Left and right. And how did he become an apostle? He had 3 prophetic words in 2 weeks. And there was 3 prophetic words that really confirmed his calling to be an apostle. What a joke! Yeah, no mission, no nothing. Anyway. So it happens, and people don't realize. People don't realize. It's same thing with the healing of the generational tree. And we're going to have to talk about it. It's going to come up because it has a long history, by the way. In fact, as far as I am aware, this is where it starts. This is where it starts. So you can baptize it all day long. You can baptize it in the 20th century, but it's going to be a tough one. So I know I'm not going to make a lot of friends. Okay. If you're interested, by the way, in the first episode having to do with what is a cult, the difficulties posed by the American system, particularly because we are politically polytheistic. We're secular, and so politically polytheistic, taking a so-called neutral stance. It's a joke, by the way. There's no such thing. And so, if you want to understand the difficulties that churches face and the anti-cult movements face in a system like that, you're going to have to refer back to my episode about snake handlers. Okay. Let's see. Oh yeah, Matty G in the comments says they were allowed to have his friends were allowed to have GI Joes, but not Cobras. It's because in the interview, the guy says He-Man has more power than Jesus. But then he goes and he says that Cobra is a symbol of the devil. A cobra. I mean, okay, yeah. So that's, so because Cobra, and it's a bad guy in the show. It's a bad guy. And they get beat constantly. Anyway, so okay, false prophets and deluded subjects, 19th century. Begins with a quote by Frederick M. Davenport from a book called Primitive Traits in Religious Revivals. And it says this, in what civilized country do evidences of religious fanaticism more abound? Okay, he's talking about America. In what civilized country? Where do you have where do you have in the world, where do you have some place where you have more religious fanaticism? Okay? Talks about the idea of stereotypes, right? And we need to be really clear about this, that when we're talking about cults, we're going to face a number of things that I hope that the critical listener, the one viewing the show who's critical, that they're going to really think about this and say, look, if I use this as the standard by which to judge this group, does that standard come back at me? Hold on. I might have to sneeze. I don't know if I've ever sneezed on a show. I don't know if I've ever sneezed on a show before live. But we have to be able to look back and to ask ourselves these questions, because I think sometimes when people are describing, if the common person, the Johnny Q, Sally Sue, sitting in the pew, these folks, if they're asked what is a cult, I think some of the most immediate reactions to that are going to be things that the person might raise their eyebrow a little and go, don't you guys have like a pope and a magisterium and dogma and stuff? Don't you have like a priest in confession? Like, don't you have these sorts of things? And we're going to learn today that that was a huge deal in American history. But we can find parallels even with like groups like the Moonies, right? The Some Young Moon crowd. The ones out there, selling flowers and stuff out on the street. A lot of the marriages where you see like a big stadium filled with hundreds or thousands of people getting married at the same time. Or the Hare Krishnas. Have you ever seen the Hare Krishnas? I watched an interview happen. A total cultic personality, the leader of it, as it is right now, the guy that's running it right now. He's in a group and he's talking to a bunch of individuals, right? And it's set up by him. The moderator or the MC is a supporter. Okay, so really they're running the mic. Okay, it's not a critical thing. But people are allowed in there to be critical. So there are people from different religions who are coming in, or quote unquote non-religions, right? That would say, yeah, well, we have criticisms of what you're saying. And what he did every time is you jump in real quick. Like they'd be mid-sentence and he just boom, jumps in right away and just answers the question very matter-of-factly and says things to get everybody kind of agreeing with him, and then lets the person talk. And he keeps, over and over. I almost wanted to count how frequently he did that. It causes an enormous amount of confusion, by the way. But perhaps the most persistent of these charges just means that the deviant behaviors in question have always existed. The small religious groups have always engaged in the familiar sorts of violent and exploitative behavior. So that's one of the most common charges, talking about, deviant behavior, particularly to do with things like sex. Now, prophets and fanatics. The contemporary image of the cult leader who seduces his fanatical followers into destructive conflict with the established authorities is centuries old. So we talked about that in Enthusiasm, didn't we? So you're already, and you're seeing kind of an overlap, aren't you, already, if you're thinking that the description so far, right? Fanatical followers, destructive conflict with the established authorities. Okay, so far that's not a cult, right? We could say that's an enthusiasm. And he's going to talk about that word, by the way. It's even mentioned in the New Testament. In the European Middle Ages, the recurrent nightmare figure was the prophetos, the charismatic leader who decided that it was usually a man, had a special revelation from God to uproot the current political and ecclesiastical order and to initiate a new order of righteousness, commonly by force of arms. So you have people all throughout history who take a position that say the leaders of society are whack. The world has gone wicked bad. They start separating themselves from their co-religionists. They're no longer communing with their co-religionists. They start thinking that maybe their church has apostatized. Maybe they've lost the faith. Okay? Maybe they've fallen away. They become apostate. And maybe the tradition, whether it's the councils, whether it's the popes, they've contradicted. And we're now left at a place where we can no longer trust those authorities. And you got to trust this dude over here. And you're like, where is he? And you're like, oh, come on, we'll go see him. That's like a sure indication that maybe you got something wrong. Maybe something ain't working right. But these prophets were often accused of sexual unorthodoxy, orgies, and plural marriages. Deviant practices were sometimes justified by antinomian ideas. And as a reminder for what that means, it means the idea that you are beyond the law, right? Lawless. And we're gonna hear about this here in a little bit with a better definition to go into more detail as to what exactly that meant. Typically, a kind of perfectionism that's like, look, I'm above sin. Doesn't matter what the church says. Doesn't matter what the saints say. Doesn't matter what the scripture says. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what society says. To that extent, those rules would be a kind of slavery to an illusion in that sense. The sexually promiscuous Messiah leading his armed devotees to a fortress in the wilderness, they typically run out to the... And that's another thing when you hear this, times have gotten real bad. The church has gotten real bad. You can no longer trust the authorities. You can no longer trust the church. You can no longer trust the councils or the popes or anything like that. You can't trust them. We got to go and we got to run out into the wilderness. I can tell you the vast overwhelming majority of instances where that takes place go crazy. That's why you can hardly find any that don't. In fact, I would love to hear of ones that have lasted for 15 years or more that are stable. It'd be really great because we could rack those buggers up right next to the ones that turn into sex cults, and you've got yourself, hardly anything. Almost a statistical being irrelevant at that point. Like, well, okay, I guess you're going to have a couple. Whoop-de-doo. And every one of those groups, just so you're aware, not everyone, a lot of those groups went because they were rigoristas. They were rigorous. They were trying to get away from worldliness, and in doing so, ended up becoming, polygamous sex cults or shepherding movement cults. In 1534, the prophet Jan of Leyden introduced communism and polygamy in the German city of Munster, in a utopia regime enforced by a ruthless violence of the quote-unquote saints, the children of God. Yeah. The experiment was destroyed with utmost ferocity by the established order of lords, bishops, and patricians. It was an Anabaptist sect. It became over time a far gentler breed whose modern heirs are found among the Amish and the Mennonites. So here's the thing. You got the birth, right? The kind of forerunners, the predecessors, the precursors of the Amish and the Mennonites. And they were completely whack. And they weren't just completely whack, right? We have a system here where it was a theocracy, as most of these utopias are, right? And this one was a polygamous theocracy. And Jan of Leyden, or John, you can call him John, proclaimed himself the king of the New Jerusalem. So when he was in Munster, he's like, I'm the king of the New Jerusalem. He was baptized by a guy named, John Mathis? Baptized him. John ended up expelling I think that one is actually Jan, expelled Catholics, outlawed money, forbade property ownership. Okay, so he comes in under the name of democracy, under the name of egalitarianism, let's go. This kind of thing goes rolling up in there, ends up baptizing a dude who makes himself the king of the New Jerusalem. He wore this kingly costume, right? He wore a costume. And that kingly costume was, of course, funded and made in part thanks, to the money and the property that was no longer available to the citizens of the New Jerusalem. And you'll see this all the time. All the time. His motto, which did not serve him well. This is one of those things like it kind of doesn't last. It's like that one, it didn't age very well. His motto was, God's might is my strength. It didn't really help him. I'm surprised the dudes didn't rise up and just slaughter the guy, because he made a law that said that any woman any man who goes and proposes to a woman, that woman, the first man who proposes to her, she must marry. Think about that, ladies. Think about that. You're like, the first one? Oh no. It was like a gold rush. is a gold rush. All the dudes are like, oh, dang, son, we better go. So it's like competition amongst the dudes. You know, tough luck for the quadriplegic guy over there. He's not doing too good. Guys, come on. Hook a brother up now. Carry me over there. And they're like, no way, man. No way. Come on, at least spare me one. And then he looks over and is, you know, it's a lady. She's all bedridden because she's fat. And he's like, not that one. Don't do that one. Of course, Jan of Leyden, he ended up having 16 wives. He beheaded one of them. But he had 16. He ends up dying in the end, of course. Inquisitors come in, a Catholic army, right, brought together by the bishops and everybody else, the lords, the bishops, the patricians. They roll in with the Catholic army, and they literally just wipe these people out. And they went in, and they ended up torturing Jan of Leyden to death right there in the public square. So it didn't work out too well for this cat. But we begin to see this. This is an example early on of a group that's got bizarro utopian views. It's kind of a summation of all of it, right? You've got the authoritarianism under the name of egalitarianism, this communistic impulse that everybody has everything in common except for the leader and the leadership class, the sexual deviancy, the fanaticism that results in them, you know, people dying and stuff. The equation seemed obvious. Claims of personal revelation led to violent subversion and unrestrained sexuality, which, if unchecked, would destroy the social order. We have the same kind of thing, fears that were kind of conjured up around David Koresh. We'll talk about David Koresh actually later, and we'll talk about even documentaries since then that I think have done a really good job in explaining who they were, how it started, what was done during that time. It's going to be an interesting one. The full consequences of unregulated religious debate emerged during the English Civil Wars of the 1640s, when the government lost control of public preaching and printing. The result was an upsurge of every kind of extreme and heretical belief. The crisis reached its blasphemous climax in 1656 with the Quaker James Nayler. Now, I think that James Nayler, in this book, and I'd be interested to know if Philip Jenkins, I'm assuming he had to have read Knox's book, but Enthusiasm. But Knox spends a significant amount of time talking about Nayler. And what it was, he had the misfortune of, he was a Quaker, and they have this weird view, right? The inner light and that Christ within you. In fact, George Fox and his wife, people would talk to them and to each other sometimes, depending on the kind of holiness they thought you had. They would sometimes talk to you in a way that they would use descriptors that are normally given only to God. Okay, so it'd be like if I was talking to you and calling you Adonai, Elohim, Yahweh. If I was using terms like that, right? The Alpha and the Omega. If I was using those phrases to you in describing you and your grandeur. Now, George Fox, his lady friend, who he ended up marrying, she was very fond of talking to him that way. People can probably chalk that up as like a, kind of the mate pairing in cults and stuff, and I don't know if you'd want to call it a cult. I think it was like an informal one with George Fox. And it only later became obvious, and when it became obvious and he started using that power more directly in saying what Quakers had to believe, that they started saying, well, wait a second, I thought we weren't doing that. The whole time they were kind of following him anyway, with the exception of Nayler. And that's only because Nayler was born with the misfortune of looking a lot like paintings that were popular at the time of our Lord. So he looked like our Lord in the paintings and icons and stuff. And very handsome guy, nice beard, hair, and slender, everything else. And he's in a group of people who use these descriptions of Christ within, that we are Christ. And they have a very strange view of that. It's a curious view, right? And so the thing is that you couple those two things together, and it's not long before you are put on like a horse or a mule, and a bunch of ladies are walking in front of you in the rain, singing the Sanctus and putting down branches on the ground in front of you as if, you're being ushered into town as the Lord, which is what happened. And in fact, it's actually a beautiful story about him. And it's beautifully written. Talking about the rain coming down. He's got his hat and the rain's dripping down and the mud. You got these women, right? And they're pulling, and they're with this. He's sitting atop the animal behind them, and they're pulling like this, and they're singing that song, right, to the Lord. And it's glorious, right? It's this droning thing that it's coming, that the Lord is here, everybody. And all of a sudden, blam! Next thing you know, people come up, they arrest them buggers, and the story of what happened to him is tragic. He lived, but he had a big old nail through his, basically got it tongue pierced. And other lashings and things like that. And he ended up, caving, and they were all upset. They were all upset, all the ladies especially. They were really mad. You've lost the power. You've lost it, James. You caved when you were tortured. You lost the power. Yeah. Believe it or not, he never had it, and it's not even positive for sure that he was wanting that, to be frank. But the word cult wouldn't have meant very much at the time of Nayler. In 1646, Protestant writer Thomas Edwards published his encyclopedic Gangrene, Gangrene, which provided, quote, a catalog of many of the errors, heresies, blasphemies, and pernicious practices of the sectaries of this time. In the process, he offered a list of almost every extreme and esoteric belief that would resurface in America over the next 2 centuries. So you got to think, what that means is that it's old. These beliefs, in fact, are anything but new. They're not new. You had groups like the Ranters, the Antinomians, the Pantheists, the Nudists, Communists, Perfectionists, self-anointed prophets, disorderly women. And by the way, the Ranters, people, I wrote this down, 1649 to 1660, English Commonwealth. Okay, they weren't organized that we know of. A lot of these, sometimes it comes from the people who oppose them. Right? You don't have a lot of their own literature sometimes. They had no leader, and they were pantheistic. Antinomian, pantheistic. They rejected the very notion of obedience. So that idea of obedience, what's the point if we're all God? If it's all God, or if I have attained perfection and I am above the law, I transcend it, then any kind of traditional moral code, any social code, it doesn't apply. They revived the brethren of the Spirit's amoralism, which is why they used ideas that sin was imaginary. Of course, they would have to contend that people who say it's not are wrong, maybe even, sinning and stuff. I don't know why they were upset about anybody. Why they'd be upset or mad. Some of them said that they could kiss and hug ladies and even, sleep with their neighbor's wife. And that it would be perfectly fine, no problem here, boys. Nothing to look at, just me being sexually promiscuous and such. No matter the scripture, no matter the saint, no matter what the church has to say. In fact, kings and princes and lords must bow to the poorest of the peasants. So we had all this. And in that time, they were already depicting sect leaders as confidence tricksters, thieves, and sexual exploiters. Now, he mentions that we have Irenaeus, Eusebius, Augustine, others, church fathers, who confronted a lot of these belief systems, okay, the underlying issues of these systems, and they found there a vocabulary. And don't you love this, by the way? I hope you do. They found a vocabulary that was required to combat the newly labeled fanatics and enthusiasts. So they found in the fathers of the church, they found a vocabulary, a functional use, functional words with functional definitions that were able to give them the ability to categorize adequately, to properly frame things and to understand. It was functional. And we contend here that given as much history as we have behind us, that we have a kind of predictive power. That we can look at a cycle of enthusiasm, for example, to look at that and to recognize a certain cycle that goes along with that, as Knox calls a kind of fatality. It plays itself out. To update it, it's almost like a virus or a simulation. Rarely ever turns itself around. Both words, fanatic and enthusiast, according to Jenkins, have become debased in later speech. I don't think that's true. Even we use the word substance all the time. That doesn't change the theological or philosophical understanding of what we're talking about. I think we need. You don't let go of that. We need to reinstate that term. Otherwise, we do not have. We have difficulties in understanding, interpreting, and classifying different motivations, different ideas, and in the sequence that leads to schism. What are they leading to that? Are they just Catholic? Are they just Christian? What are they? As radical Democrats, the Quakers rejected tokens of social hierarchy and challenged the power of clergy by vocally disputing the formal services of the steeple houses. Yeah, this is where you have George Fox. And in fact, that's one of my favorite episodes of the Enthusiasm series. And I liked the LUT too. It's like a green, kind of cool looking. That was the filter. Okay. So I wanted it to look kind of have the cinematic feel of what the chapter reminded me of, this vintage thing, right? The kind of style, the idea, like what colors and things and the saturation and everything, what would reflect the idea of this vintage thing, throwing back to George Fox, to Nayler and the crew, the ladies all complaining, you lost the power, walking around singing Hosanna and the Sanctus. Are equally shocking. Their most active preachers were often women. Now, that's true. Now, we should remind everybody here that with enthusiasms, at least, which lead to cults, it doesn't inevitably, but every cult would be a kind of enthusiasm gone haywire, right? Which is already an enthusiasm that became enthusiastic about the enthusiasm. I mean, it's like taking it to another level. So it's on that spectrum, right? It's in that sequence, and it just keeps on trucking. It goes over that cliff. So there's no brakes, no nothing. It's like the train flying over that kind of thing. And so that's what you're dealing with. But a lot of those enthusiasms, they had women at the center of them. That's a recurring theme that Knox talks about. You have subversive images recurring during the Great Awakening of the 1730s and 1740s, when the ordained clergy were challenged by revivalists asserting that only those properly filled with the Spirit could lead the churches. That's old school, isn't it? That's like a relative to Donatism, isn't it? Be a relative to Donatism. And to say that, they would come up and say, but wouldn't it make sense, in fact? Isn't that the logical conclusion? If you don't, if you take that position that this is like a special extra anointing style thing, that you're twirling around in a circle, quoting the Psalms all day long, that, for 3 days in a row with no sleep, that this might be evidence of the Holy Ghost in you doing powerful things. And that might actually qualify you to a greater extent than the guy who has no such experience. In fact, even the idea, the Moravian idea of the conversion experience and the role that played, right, in the Great Awakenings, the idea that it played in any of the Great Awakenings, the idea even with Charles Finney, and we'll hear about him. And you hear about Zinzendorf, for example. In Pennsylvania, the Moravian leader, there we go. The Moravian leader, Count Zinzendorf, who held daring ideas about sex and spirituality, was a special target for charges that he exploited his female disciples. His enemies christened him the Herzen's Papa, or Heart's Daddy. Interestingly enough, Zinzendorf, I found this out, Zinzendorf, his idea of the family was a communal family. And he divided them into things called choirs. So that's based on age, marital status, gender. He said that they have different needs based on these things, and because they have different needs, it's good to divide them up in that way. And of course, he had secret half doctrines. So, like secret things that people found out, they were like, wait a second, why aren't you public about this? I don't know. Awful Disclosures, America, 1830 to 1870. 1830s and 40s. The anti-papist image. And this is where it gets really important for us here. Because what that means for us is that, as I said before, the largest and most highly coordinated anti-cult movement in history was probably this, the anti-Catholic one, in America. The anti-papist image had colonial roots, but was amplified by the presence of significant numbers of Catholic immigrants from the 1830s onward. They depicted lay Catholics as ignorant puppets, whose priests were sexually exploitative and conspiratorial. All the later anti-cult images were present here. Catholics exemplified mindless obedience to a deceitful religious leader, and authority was founded upon bloodthirsty enforcement. So this is the idea. It's within that context, the residue of that persisted even into the day of JFK, which makes sense of why he was asked the question as to how he would rule in light of our beliefs regarding a pope, magisterium, Catholic social teaching. This alien religion, known as Catholicism, proselytized vigorously, drew naive young people into its web, and lured them to renounce their careers and prospects in order to enter celibate and totalistic religious communities. In fact, in some cases, they could say communistic. Couldn't they? They could say, look, you guys are communes over here. You've separated yourself away. You've divided yourself from family. In some cases, contrary to what the family would want. Converts, or convents, and religious houses, which are found in all major American cities by the Civil War era, seemed as glaring an offense to personal freedom as intellectual liberty, as the cult houses and headquarters of the 1970s. So the idea being that people were afraid at that time, oh my gosh, if we have these Catholics here, we're not going to have intellectual liberty, freedom and liberty. We're not going to have that type stuff. The notion of escaping from a religious community first appeared in the context of Catholic convents. So a lot of times people will say, well, people in cults, you need to rescue them. They need to escape the cult. This idea first began, and just think about it. If you're in a convent and you end up fleeing and leaving, or you say that you did, we're going to find that out here in a moment. In fact, the most popular book, contemporary book in America, most widely read contemporary book in America prior to Tom Sawyer. And it was by the way, totally fake. Totally phony. It's a hoax. The notion of escaping from a religious community first appeared in the context of Catholic convents. Some of the bloodiest urban riots of antebellum period erupted when citizens tried to liberate nuns from their supposed captivity, or else to seek evidence of their crimes. So imagine going in and having weirdos coming in, and they're like, look, we're here to save you. And you're like, from what? We're here to save you from the cult. And you're like, we're in here praying. We're praying the hours. We're making bread. That's what they're doing. We're doing paintings and learning to pray mental prayer. You gotta escape. We'd rather not. You must be a criminal. And at that point, you're kind of in the search for the Holy Grail, right? With how do you determine she's a witch? You're kind of in the heads I win, tails you lose situation with the wild, foaming at the mouth crazies outside your convent. Imagine that. So they're like, we're either here to help you escape because you want to leave, or if you don't want to escape, we're coming in to find some evidence of crimes. Dang. Particularly sought after were the secret tunnels, said to link the dwellings of priests and nuns and the hidden cemeteries in which were buried the murdered babies resulting from these liaisons. So that was the idea. So I mean, you're already in the world of them saying, "Look, you go to the convent. There's a hidden tunnel. Let's find it." And they're all looking around for the hidden tunnels. Also foreshadowing modern trends, the anti-Catholic movement, right, paraded defectors from this evil organization, purported former nuns and priests whose firsthand accounts confirmed the worst charges about the sexual exploitation said to be rampant behind the walls of convents and rectories. Now, where did it begin? So you add to this the defector. Okay, so not just escaping, not just going in. Yeah, that would be the escapist, right? The person escaping, the defector, the person who says, "I'm done. I've had it." That person goes out, and this person these ideas surfaced in the sensational, awful disclosures of Maria Monk, 1836. That's the name of the book. It's kind of like The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, but, even faker. The awful disclosures of Maria Monk told the life of a Quebec convent. It's a prototype for all subsequent defector memoirs. The book portrayed nuns as sex slaves, and its lurid depictions of flagellation added to its strong sadomasochistic appeal. Now, who was this individual? The individual in question, of course, Maria Monk, come to find out, most scholars not only now recognize her book as a hoax, but they found out that she lived in the asylum, right? She lived in an asylum, and she had a brain injury, which led people to wonder a couple things. Number one, who were her handlers? Did she have handlers? There were people who were helping to support this and to drive this message. Of course, later they would turn their back on her. In fact, when she actually probably needed them most. Because people can be that way. Was she manipulated? Did she understand the repercussions of this, the consequences of this? So we're talking culpability. I mean, this is the generous take, in fact. It was the most widely read contemporary book before Tom Sawyer. But then there was a Protestant newspaper that investigated the convent. And what they found was a whole bunch of problems with the descriptions of things. In other words, this is not happening. This was not here. 7 years she spent in the Magdalen Asylum for Wayward Girls. There's a character in the book called Jane Ray, who was also a resident of Magdalen Asylum for Wayward Girls. Many claims began, in fact, with her legal guardian, and that's where the handler issue comes in. Okay, this would be William K. Hoyt, an anti-Catholic activist. So again, we're not just being rude about the idea of a handler. You have a legal guardian. You have a person who's hardcore anti-Catholic activist. And this person, she found no support. She went later on, even after the investigation, went later on to write a second book about it, okay? Wrote a second book. And that second book was popular for a minute until she had a child out of wedlock. And at that point, all of her support faded away. Another book was called The Priest, the Woman, and the Confessional, 1875. This was by apostate priest Charles Chinicoy, if I'm pronouncing it right, who described the sexual exploitation of women parishioners by lustful priests. Now, you may be asking yourself, or kind of maybe lamenting the fact that of all the things that could possibly be said is that priests were going after chicks. Wouldn't that be great? In a way, no, it would be terrible. But compared to the situation as it stands now, we can see times have changed. So the accusation was, it wouldn't have been as believable. So his statement was, oh no, they're going after the girls. Early 1890s, the American Protective Association propaganda campaign reached its height. It talked about the convent life as grotesque ceremonies, orgies of sex and sadism at the hands of, quote, licentious and lecherous priests, seeking to lure young and innocent girls into sin. Now, one of the things about this guy, okay, one of the things about him, he was a huge influence on who? Jack Chick. Jack Chick. Yeah. By the way, I don't know what's going on in that comments section. You better be cool about it. Yeah. So you have Catholic magazines that come out. You have Catholic magazines that come out that are anti-Catholic magazines that are saying the exact same thing. In fact, anti-Catholicism can be seen as the largest and most potent anti-cult movement in American history. Several mass political movements aimed to destroy Catholic power, from the nativists and know-nothings of the mid-19th century to the American Protective Association, the APA, of the 1890s, and the Ku Klux Klan of the 1920s. And each crusade has a sizable impact on the national politics of its day. So, I mean, just think, you have all these different groups, major time impact, and one of the central things about that group is anti-Catholicism. We were the cult. They talked about the Knights of Columbus, the secret oaths. And for anybody who's been through that, I have. They talked about the conspiratorial nature of the Jesuit order. And always, of course, the promiscuous nuns and lecherous priests. In some ways, it kind of sounds like a Malachi Martin book. In some ways. Reading the Lord. People are going to be like, what? What did he just say? How dare you? They're going to come out with the pitchforks. How dare you? I'll be like, dude, come on. Cut it out. Reading the Lord charges presented in propaganda sheets like the Menace was enough to, quote, to make any boy wonder if the priest kept beautiful young girls tied up in confessional booths, and if there was really an arsenal in the church basement. Was there really? We have other conspiracies about things to do with basements. I won't go into that because there might be a little bit of evidence to that. I've seen the Instagram. I've seen it. I'm not joking. And I've seen when it was removed. According to their enemies, right, you have others, Masons and Mormons, like Catholics, belong to a sinister false religion. We believe that. So sometimes you have groups that come against one group that then comes against another group, and everybody's calling each other a cult. Of course, the one difference is that we actually have the historical standing and ecclesiastical standing by which to declare such things. It's just true. 2,000 years, we've been around a minute. We have been around a minute. And by the way, yes, Freemasonry is definitely a cult. Each was a closed, secretive organization that maintained order and discipline through threat of violence. You had flawed utopias. We're coming up on the end of this, actually. Okay. Flawed utopias, you have Mesmerist and the Swedenborgian. Is it Swedenborgian or Swedenborgian? How'd you pronounce that? I've only seen, some of these things I should listen to more lectures on. I read a lot about it. But I sometimes, I see these words and I'm like, you read them and you recognize it, you're like, okay. But then you talk about it, you're like, how do you pronounce that? But mystical notions, by the time that these groups were around, mystical notions were well established by the 1830s. In fact, by the 1830s, that's when you started having other mystical notions, like the parousia, meaning the rapture. So you have Schofield in them, the dispensationalist group. the pre-tribulation rapture theory, which started, of course, with a woman having visions and in fact, there were multiple raptures and stuff that were involved in that. Changed a whole bunch. Scofield, of course, with his Bible with all the different commentary in it. Then you had Joseph Smith, Book of Mormon. A whole bunch of that stuff. Now, just to let people know, when you say by the time you get to that, by the time you get to the 1830s, occultic ideas had been, I mean, it'd be very easy if you were to describe just a litany of occultic ideas. You know, if you were to describe those, most Americans would be familiar with that. They'd say, well, I don't believe that, but they at least know what it is. They've read something about it. They're familiar with it. Maybe they've heard sermons about it. Maybe they know someone who was in on it. But mesmerism, what's that? Franz Mesmer, German physician. He had an interest, of course, in astronomy. He believed natural energy transference between animate and inanimate objects. So the idea that, like, you might get energy transferred to you from, like, what's around, like maybe, for example, the idea of crystals. When we talk about that, or when people are like, hey, man, I think this thing in your house might have a wicked thing attached to it. And you're like, which one? You're like, you're Atari. I guess it depends. Hypnotism. Right? He believed it, of course, in that. He believed it had to do with animal magnetism, what he called animal magnetism. And that there was sickness was related and connected in some way to issues of the planets and the moons. Now, this guy, like, you know, you had this a lot where weirdos were brought in to analyze weirdos under the auspice that they weren't weirdos. And so, like, that was a common thing. You'd have people come in and be like, well, we want you to analyze the situation. Like, yeah, it's okay. I'm looking at it. Like, we really like your ideas about animal magnetism. We think that's really profound, that maybe the planets are involved in our sicknesses and stuff. We're really interested in that. What do you think about this exorcism by this Catholic priest? So he goes and he analyzes this and walks away saying, very, very powerful animal magnetism. And they're like, oh, yes. Yeah. And his method, he got in trouble. He ended up a major time scandal. He was a super wealthy guy, super wealthy pad, right? Lifestyles of the rich and the heinous. And by heinous, I mean his method, when he would do his miracle cures and stuff, his method involved stuff like gently touching the knees, right? And most often, a lot of girl patients, touching the knees, pressing his thumbs into the palms, caressing down their arms, and gazing deeply into their eyes. I'm like, dude, this guy. And then after it was all over, he'd play a glass harmonica. Wow. Holy cow, man. Now, this dude was just a perv. This guy was just Mac tonight. That's all he was doing. He was Mac tonight. Playing his glass harp, right? Face like the moon. That's what he was doing. Rubbing down gently on the ladies and stuff. And he ended up, you know, fake healings and stuff, partial healings, whatever. And then Swedenborg, okay, his followers, he had some weird beliefs. I mean, for one, for example, there's no end times. You have a spiritual last judgment. But he was what's called the full-preterist, meaning that he believed that all of the things that were talked about in Scripture pertaining to the end, right, pertaining to the return of Christ, those rising from the dead, for example, the resurrection from the grave, all of those things, that all of those things took place in AD 70. So he believes that in AD 70, that all of that stuff took place. Now, I'm a partial preterist. I do not believe that'd be heretical. It is heretical to hold that position. Because then once that happens, you're kind of in this eminent world. And you end up having some real weirdness after that. He says that the Bible was a kind of symbolic correspondence to ultimate truth, like a parable. It has a spiritual sense, but oftentimes that is kind of like shrouded beneath the words and the imagery. And it's going to take some magical eyeballs, a special monocle, in fact. I got to break this out for this. Yeah, a special monocle, in fact. He's like, yes, I see. I'm reading the scriptures. Yes, I'm seeing. Oh, listen to me. He believed that heaven and hell are, in fact, internal states. And so wherever you went after that, it wasn't as though God sent you there. It was already in there, right? It was already part of your internal nature, in fact. He had extra books that he thought, at least at one time, were part of the canon. For example, the wars of, is it the wars or the words? I think it's the wars of Jehovah, mentioned in Numbers 21, 14 and 15, as well as Joshua. And you can see that, I believe in, Joshua 10, 12 through 13, and 2 Samuel 1, 17 and 18. So like my uncle, I mentioned this before, my uncle did this study where he went through the Old Testament and he tried to find as many books and as much information about books that were quoted or cited or referenced in the Old Testament, and then to go and read those. Took him like 10 years. His followers, once he died, he was weird enough. His followers, once he died, they kind of took on ideas of theosophy and alchemy and Kabbalah, even things like divination. And they claimed a lot of this, right? Like a lot of their understanding, even of things like heaven and hell, came from personal experiences. Because apparently, homeboy was also, sent to heaven and hell in order to investigate, to find out what's really going on. What's really going on down here? What are the experiences and conditions of heaven right now? What are you talking about? The conditions. I'm making sure it's in good condition. He's got himself a checklist and a red pen. What a weirdo. What a weird cat. He needed to report on that. And of course, the two essential doctrines, which I should have mentioned earlier, one of those is Arianism, essentially. All right, Jehovah is the one God. Jesus is what would it be? Divine, right? He would be a divine embodiment, a spirit person. And the Holy Ghost is the activity. And the last group we're going to talk about today, just in showing that as we go along, so I mean, you're already by that time, you're getting a whole mix, not only of the occult, but you're getting the structural patterns that emerge with the strong leader that takes enthusiasm to the next level. That's what you get. Not just schism, straight up cult. So you get this. But you also have in that interplay back and forth, and we'll talk next time about what Philip Jenkins believes is a kind of cycle of cults and anti-cult activity. He says it's not strict, but you can see general patterns emerge, and there's times where it's the cults are booming, and then you have the anti-cult reaction, and then you have a kind of low period where stuff's still kind of rumbling, but then it comes back, boom. And it goes in certain cycles, and even with conditions in society. And I would say that would be something that we could overlap. We could do like layers like Photoshop, right? Where you have multiple layers on top of each other, like those what were they called? Projectors, right? In school back in the day, you had the little film projector, and you could use a little marker on it and erase it and stuff. And you could lay one down, another down, and you've added layers to it. I think this is something worthy of attention to say, look at overall history, technological advancements, things to do with science, things to do with philosophy, economic situations, war, famine, stuff like that. And then lay over top of that significant changes that were made either in the development of certain ideas or the reaction to those ideas. Or sometimes the reaction moving forward saying, and I don't want to get too Hegelian with that, but saying that there is a kind of an idea, for example, an adaptation that says, if with the Counter-Reformation, for example, and some of the decisions that were made, or some of the things that may begin, like we talked in secular age, would begin in a good way, right? Trying to understand nature, to understand the nature of the world, to categorize things, to defend science and the like. But then as we find it out and we learn more about its mechanisms, people begin to say, well, look, I can imagine that thing right there doing it by itself. And so I'd like to see that, and how cults play into that. So you'd have enthusiasm, secular age, and you'd have cults like laid on top, right? That layer, that system that would give timelines of that, ideas. I think that'd be a really fun project to do. Right here. One celebrated colony was established by a certain John Humphrey Noyes on the principle that the second coming had already occurred. Now, okay, so was it Noyes or was it, no, I thought that Swedenborg, I thought Swedenborg was also, was Swedenborg the guy or was it Noyes? I hope I didn't get the wrong cat. That would bum me out big time. But I thought that was the idea of it being a full preterist, but the idea with Noyes too. So John Humphrey Noyes, the second coming had already occurred. The group practiced community of property and experimented with ideas of what he called complex marriage, dismissing monogamy as, quote, idolatrous love. So you hear that kind of talk with anarchists, to be brutally honest. Like the Anarchist Cookbook, right? Knights, what is it? Is it Knights of Love or what is it called? I forget. I have a couple of these books from Crime Think, right? Noyes was a utopian socialist. He's the one who coined the term complex marriages. Okay, his dad was a U.S. representative, so sometimes these guys are coming from big-time families. Sometimes, and you're going to see this more and more, is that oftentimes some of the leaders are people who held large, powerful positions or were raised in wealthy families. It's not always people who are, kind of your lower class individuals. Many of the adherents might be, but I think this changes a lot when it comes to a certain level of activity and involvement with cults, particularly the New Age. We'll see this with Father Yod and stuff like that. The Source family. Good documentary, by the way, about it. Maybe we'll watch that on Telegram. Maybe we'll watch that documentary together. I'll just stream it on Telegram. We can watch it together and you can see. We'll do that with some documentaries connected to different groups and videos. I'll just set up times where we can go there, and that way it's no issue. Nothing like that. 1880s, at its height, the membership reached almost 300. Yeah. And so the idea, just so people know, the idea of perfectionism, again, the idea that he did not sin. And he went to some pretty nice schools too, by the way. Where did he go? I thought I put it in here. He went to some pretty nice schools. He went to Dartmouth, right, for law, but then he left. He went to Andover Seminary. Later he went to Yale. I think he got kicked out for heresy. He said, they're still sinning over there, and I'm still preaching. They can take away the license, doesn't matter. I'm still preaching. I took away their right to sin. They're still sinning. That's his tit for tat. What a dummy. But the idea is that he didn't sin. He was heavily influenced by Charles Finney. Charles Finney, of course, was a heretic. I mean, that's just true. So regardless of what people think about that Great Awakening with him, the revivalism with him, he was definitely a heretic. He said that the fact that he did not sin is because he came from a perfect heart. He was antinomian. There was no traditional moral or social standard to judge him by. He ended up, of course, being arrested for, adultery and such. And worse than that, he ended up being arrested for statutory, they were coming after him for statutory rape. He took a position that the shame at the fall had to do with the kind of premarital relations, right? And he had a weird view about that I won't go into much. I have the notes here. I said that's where it gets more. Let's just say that there was practicing going on, and he was very controlling of what people were able to do, and that he made it so that everybody, if they wanted to be with somebody else, they had to go through a kind of council, except for him. And he was the only one who could practice with young girls and virgins. We'll leave it at that for now. We'll save the intercourse magic, literally, the Crowleyan type stuff. Leave that for the conversation that's going to happen here in a matter of moments over on Telegram. Link in description below. So here's the thing. In the end, more worrying developments of the religious fringe scandal followed. Robert Matthews, the prophet Matthias, who declared himself the incarnate spirit of truth, and who gathered a band of dedicated followers in New York City of 1830. The New York affair ended in disaster when Matthias was charged with swindling and murdering one of his followers. Kind of like the situation with Noyes, where he gets in trouble. He gets told, hey, man, they're going to come arrest you. So he flees up to Canada, and then later on sends a letter back and says, hey, guys, I think we gotta stop the complex marriages. Things are getting a little complex. I hear you, buddy. Oh, I hear you all right. Little complex for you and that 14-year-old dude. Still more enduring, more widespread were charges against the Shaker movement. Established in the United States since the late 18th century, the communal and celibate Shakers enjoyed their greatest period of expansion during the religious fervor of the 1840s. Imagine if everyone was just a Shaker. Wouldn't we all die? I mean, we'll need to talk more about the Shakers in another episode. In fact, we'll talk about that in the very next one. People believed that their system was anti-Christian. With its extreme veneration of prophetic founder Mother Ann Lee, Shaker rituals were dismissed as unorthodox and blasphemous, with services that involved ritual dancing, and enemies charged that secret ceremonies were carried out in the nude. Dyer also described the secret sexual practices of the Shaker leadership, who purportedly enhanced their stuff. I'll leave that. I didn't catch that. I'm sorry. We will not say how the Shakers did that. That's going to be on Telegram. That's where the adults are going to have to go, because that's what's going to happen. Yeah. And of course, they were using mesmerism by that point. So we're going to talk next time. We're going to talk about the fighting the sects, 1870 to 1890. This is going to involve the Mormon crisis, the Theosophical Society, Mary Baker Eddy with Christian Science, Blavatsky, different court decisions that took place. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. You're going to have Arthur Conan Doyle. He publishes his A Study in Scarlet. Okay, so we're going to talk about a bunch of that stuff, a little bit about the Mormons. It's not going to be the full-blown conversation that we're going to eventually have about the Mormons, because we're going to have to go through, kind of like we did with the Jehovah's Witnesses. We're going to talk probably three episodes, maybe 4 max, talking about Mormon distinctives. Okay. So we're going to do that. So, all right. I'm going up here. I'm going to real quick just show this, and then we're heading out. I'm only going to look at it for a minute. I don't even see very many here. I think it could be wrong. When the start of America, the Catholic was labeled a cult. Yes. Lashansky, good to see you, by the way. Have you ever seen the Hulu exclusive series called The Path? Very cultish show revealing the issue when private revelation and other cultish practices. No, I have not. But I am actually very glad that you shared that with me here. I'm always interested in watching things, especially if it's like entertaining and informative, and it helps with the show, because then I hit numerous markers all at the same time. All at the same time, homie. All at the same time. Jeremiah, it is off the rails bad. Kevin Beck. Are you talking about the chat? I'm not even, look, not even going into it. Not even going into it. If there is anything that I'll look at it once it's over, I don't even want to know. We're going to have to figure it out. Okay. So I'll look at it. I do not know what is going on. Okay. I did not, as you can tell, I was trying to march along because trying to get done with the show with great haste. So that we can go over there. I'm trying to get this show shorter. The intro's got to go. The intros make it really, really, really tough. It's just totally true. It's just totally true. Let me see if I can get this set up. Okay. Yeah, because I'm going to... Oh, yeah, and by the way, it's one of those things where we're going to learn, actually, that your boy is back with the Saint Maker. And there's some changes. And so I have to go through the book. I want to talk to them. I have not talked to them yet. That's why I did not do anything with the Saint Maker today. I have to set up my profile with them. They had to revamp stuff, and they had to review stuff and find out, are they interested in having you particularly involved with them? And after reviewing it, and after taking time to hear the questions and concerns of various people, they made certain changes. There are some that have not been, some things like, overseas purchasing that is just not there. However, other changes that people laid out to them, it's my understanding that they were responsive. I will look at it myself. I'm going to make a video just about that. It's not going to be a live show, but it'll be about that. And so we'll do that very, very, very soon. Yeah. And Haley Lee says, don't look at it, Jeremiah. What are you talking about? Don't look at it. You're the admin. I have you there so that you can ensure that when I go back that I've got a joyful noise in my heart, right? It's just beating with happiness and joy because of what I see. If I go back there, you better hope I don't get mad. All righty. Okay. Make sure to go over and check out. Oh, hold on a second. No, no. I'm trying to figure this out for the song so I can hear it. There we go. Better. Okay, sorry about that. Make sure right now, click that link down below in the description. Send it over right away. Okay? Send yourself over there. Cast yourself off right from YouTube and go to Telegram. Why? Because we have a Q&A show. And the Q&A show is going to be really cool. It always is, right? It's more intimate, right? You're able to talk with other people, get to know other people, tell your side of the story, give ideas, criticisms, questions, resources, make some friends, all of that. And make sure to check out all the stuff in the description below, PaleocratDiaries.com. Look at the book club, the Canine Brigade. I heard a rumor that there's going to be a new book being talked about. Of course, the Wolfpack Prayer Chain. If you have a prayer request, right? A family member that is hurt, a family member who's dying, a wife who's having a baby, a kid who's got a sickness, right? Someone who's passed, and you're asking for prayers for the repose of their soul. Friends and family, classmates and coworkers that you're trying to reach out to and you're trying to evangelize. Maybe they're in fact an occult, and you've come to appreciate this series. Make sure to let us know. You can do that, PaleocratDiaries@gmail.com. You can send it at Jeremiah Bannister on Telegram. Add me, call me, right? We can set up a time to talk, it'd be great. And of course, follow the Wolfpack Prayer Chain. It's central to all that we do. Interviews, speeches, other inquiries, contact PaleocratDiaries@gmail.com. You can find the Patreon down below. It's really good. I'm glad to know all of you. Go over there right now. Telegram. Meet me there. Until next time, never give up. Keep on smiling. And momentum mori.
I wanted to make people dream bigger thoughts.